Decoded.
Welcome to Book Decoded. Have you ever had like that feeling, where your brain is kind of like playing tricks on you? Like you just know something's not quite right, but you can't quite like pinpoint what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're diving into this super fascinating book that really gets into all those like mental quirks we all have and how they kind of shape the way we think and, make judgments and decisions and everything.
Yeah, and the book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah, and, Kahneman, along with his longtime collaborator, Amos Tversky, they really, changed how we understand decision-making.
Yeah, for sure.
And this book came out in 2011, and it's this compilation of decades of research into basically two systems of thinking, which they call System 1, which is the fast intuitive thinking.
Okay.
And System 2, the slower, more deliberate kind of thinking.
Right, so we're not just going to, give you a boring rundown of the book, right?
Yeah.
We're going to get into the juicy parts, the aha moments, the stuff that'll make you rethink how you see the world and how you see, everybody else is thinking, too.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys wanted to know why we make, so many judgment errors? And honestly, this book is the guidebook for that.
Mm-hmm.
So get ready to explore the inner workings of your own mind. It's going to be pretty wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kahneman starts off by talking about the office water cooler. What's the deal with that?
So it's really interesting how Kahneman sets up the book. He says he wants it to be this way to enhance those everyday conversations about, the decisions we make,
Right.
why we do what we do, and why other people do what they do.
Makes sense.
And he makes this point that we all know this, but it's just so much easier to see other people's mistakes than our own.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's way more fun, too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. How often do we actually sit down and analyze our own thought process versus just casually judging what our coworker is doing?
Oh, it's so true. We're all experts in everyone else's lives.
Exactly.
So basically having this deeper understanding of how our minds work could actually help us have more informed, water cooler gossip.
Yeah, totally. And it also, can act as a little bit of a motivator for us to maybe, be a little bit more self-critical.
Yeah.
Because if we know that people are going to be evaluating our decisions based on this understanding, it might make us think twice before we act.
Right, for sure. It's almost like a peer pressure for good decision making.
Exactly. And I think Kahneman even argues that this kind of anticipated gossip is a stronger motivator than just trying to make some vague resolution to just be a better decision maker.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about Kahneman's partnership with Amos Tversky. This was a huge part of the book, and their work together was truly groundbreaking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Their collaboration was just incredible. They basically turned every conversation they had into a mini experiment.
Wow.
Which is so cool. They would come up with these questions, often involving numbers or probabilities, and then they'd see what their own gut reaction was.
Okay.
And the goal wasn't to get the right answer immediately, but to really pay attention to that first answer that popped into their heads, even if they thought it was probably wrong. It's they were studying their own intuition in real time.
That's so meta.
It is, right. It's pretty mind-bending.
Yeah.
And they had this hunch, which turned out to be totally right, that if they both shared the same intuitive answer, even if it was wrong, it was probably a common human thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And their shared intuitions basically became the foundation for understanding broader patterns of how we all think.
That's amazing. And that led them directly to their work on heuristics and biases, which is a central concept in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. They spent years having these conversation experiments, and then they started to systematically study and document all these patterns of thinking that could trip us up. So how we estimate the likelihood of events or predict the future or evaluate different options. And they had this huge moment when they published their paper called Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases.
And that was in Science magazine, right?
Yeah, which is a really big deal.
Yeah. That's the big leagues for science. So in simple terms, what are heuristics and biases?
Okay, so heuristics are basically mental shortcuts.
Okay.
Rules of thumb that our brains use to make quick decisions.
Okay, I get it.
Our System 1 thinking loves them.
Yeah.
Right, because it's all about speed and efficiency.
Yeah, makes sense.
But because they're shortcuts, they can lead to predictable errors.
Yeah.
And those errors are what we call cognitive biases.
Okay, so heuristics are the shortcuts and biases are the slip-ups.
Exactly. And their paper in Science actually laid out about 20 of these biases.
Wow, 20. It's our brains are riddled with these potential pitfalls.
In a way, yeah. but it's also what makes us human.
True. Now, I noticed that the book talks a lot about demonstrations.
Mm-hmm.
What's the significance of that? Why do they use them so much?
Well, by using these puzzles and thought experiments, they were able to show academics from all these different fields, philosophers and economists, that even they could fall prey to these cognitive illusions.
Oh, so it wasn't just about college students messing up in a lab.
Exactly, because skeptics could easily dismiss those results, right? They'd say, oh, it's just because they're young and inexperienced.
Yeah, I see that.
But when these respected thinkers stumbled on the same puzzles, it was much harder to ignore. Plus, Kahneman mentions they actually enjoyed using these demonstrations. They found them more fun and engaging.
Fun and foundational. That's a winning combo.
Okay, let's talk about a specific concept they dive into, which is substitution. So substitution is basically what happens when we're faced with a hard question, something that our system 2 really needs to work on.
Okay.
But our system 1 jumps in and answers an easier related question instead.
And we don't even realize it's happening.
Right, it's sneaky.
Wow.
So for example, let's say someone is thinking about investing in Tesla stock.
Yeah?
That's a super complicated question, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It involves lots of research and analysis, but system 1 might go, do I like Tesla cars?
Oh, I see.
And if the person loves Tesla cars, they might unconsciously be more likely to invest.
Even though liking a car doesn't guarantee a good investment.
Exactly. Those two things aren't really connected logically, but our brains substitute the easier question for the harder one.
That's fascinating. So the hard question is like the target question.
Yeah.
And the easier one is the heuristic question.
Precisely. And this substitution thing is behind so many of the biases they discovered.
Okay, so now let's talk about system 1 and system 2.
Yeah.
This is like a core idea in the book.
Yeah, it's their most famous concept.
So break it down for us. What are these systems all about?
All right, so think of system 1 as the fast, intuitive, emotional part of your mind.
Okay.
It's automatic, effortless. It works in the background without you even knowing it's there.
Okay.
And system 2 is like the slow, deliberate, logical part. It needs your conscious effort and attention to work.
So it's like the responsible one?
Exactly.
Right.
And Kahneman uses this metaphor of 2 agents in your mind to explain how they work together.
Okay.
So system 1 is constantly making these quick judgments and generating suggestions.
And system 2 is like, okay, cool, I'll go with it.
Right. Most of the time, system 2 just accepts what system 1 is saying without really questioning it.
So system 1 is like the boss.
Kind of. Kahneman actually calls it the secret author of many of our choices.
Wow. So what makes system 2 actually wake up and do some work?
System 2 gets activated when system 1 runs into a problem it can't solve, like a question it doesn't have an immediate answer to, or when something surprising happens, something that violates system 1's expectations.
Like when you're so focused on counting basketball passes, you miss a gorilla walking by.
That's a classic example.
Yeah, so surprise wakes up system 2.
Yeah. And system 2 is also in charge of things like self-control and monitoring our own thoughts.
Oh, so it's like the inner critic.
Yeah, kind of. It's there to catch us when we're about to make a mistake.
So it's a good thing we have it.
Absolutely. We need both systems to function properly.
Okay, so we've talked about how system 2 requires effort. What about this concept of cognitive load?
So system 2 has limited resources like mental energy. It's like a muscle that can get tired.
Right.
So if you're trying to do a bunch of mentally demanding tasks at once, you're going to deplete those resources faster.
Makes sense.
Kahneman gives this example of trying to multiply 2 big numbers in your head while also walking.
I can't even imagine doing that.
Most people would have to stop walking to concentrate on the math.
Right.
Because those 2 tasks are competing for the same mental energy.
That's a great example. And that actually leads us to ego depletion.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
So ego depletion is this idea that all forms of voluntary effort,
Whether it's mental, emotional, or physical.
exactly,
Right.
they all draw from the same limited pool of energy.
Interesting.
So if you use up a lot of willpower on one task,
Like resisting a donut.
you'll have less willpower left for the next task.
Like writing that report.
You'll be more likely to give up or procrastinate.
So that's why I feel so drained after a long day of making decisions.
It could be. And there's been tons of research on this.
Oh, yeah.
Like one study showed that people who had to suppress their emotions while watching a sad movie, they actually gave up sooner on a tough puzzle afterwards.
Wow. So stifling your emotions can make you mentally weaker.
In a way, yeah.
Hey.
It's like using up mental energy.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the most famous examples from the book, the bat and ball puzzle.
Oh, yes. The classic.
Lay it on us.
All right. So a bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
Okay. 10 cents.
That's what most people say, but it's actually wrong.
Really?
The ball costs 5 cents.
Oh my gosh, I totally fell for it.
It's a really common mistake. The point is that people who say 10 cents,
Yeah.
they're not engaging their system 2 to double-check the answer.
Right.
They're just accepting what system 1 throws out there.
So system 1 is quick, but not always accurate.
And it's interesting because there's this subtle hint in the way the puzzle is worded.
Oh, really?
Like, why would they ask such a simple question if the answer was obvious?
Yeah, that's true.
It's like a little test to see if your system 2 is paying attention.
So those who get it right have more active minds.
That's the idea. Some people are just more inclined to engage their system 2.
Interesting stuff. Okay, I'm ready for the next one.
All right, how about this? Bananas vomiting.
That's a weird combo.
But it perfectly illustrates this concept called associative coherence. So when you hear those two words together,
Even though they're not usually connected.
yeah, your mind immediately tries to make a connection.
Right, like maybe someone got food poisoning.
You create a story in your head,
Yeah.
even if it's a little unpleasant.
Yeah, it's like one idea triggers a whole chain reaction of other ideas.
Precisely. It's called associative activation.
Okay.
And what's amazing is how coherent this process is. Like memories, feelings, facial expressions, even physical reactions.
All linked together.
Yeah, all triggered by those two words.
And that's all thanks to System 1.
System 1 is the master of making connections.
Wow. So that brings us to priming, which is like a whole other level of mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah. Priming is wild. It's not just about words and ideas either.
Really?
Our actions and even our emotions can be primed by things we don't even consciously notice.
Oh, wow. Like subliminal messaging?
Kind of, but more subtle. There's this famous experiment where students unscrambled sentences,
Oh.
and some of the sentences had words related to old age. And guess what? Those students actually walked slower down the hallway afterwards.
No way. Just from reading words about being old.
Yep, they were primed to act old without even realizing it.
That's insane. What about the Lady Macbeth effect?
Ah, yes. So that refers to this unconscious urge to clean ourselves.
Literally wash our hands.
Yeah, after we've done something we feel guilty about.
Like a guilty conscience?
Exactly. And studies have shown that people who lied over the phone were more likely to choose mouthwash afterwards, while those who lied in an email were more likely to choose soap.
So it's like we're trying to cleanse the body part associated with the lie.
Yeah, it's a fascinating connection between physical actions and moral feelings.
Okay, I have to admit, all this priming stuff makes me feel a little uneasy. Like, do we have any free will at all?
I get that. It can be unsettling.
Yeah.
But remember, these effects are usually pretty subtle.
Right.
We're not being completely controlled by our environment, but it does have an influence.
Right. Even small influences can add up over time.
Exactly. So it's more about being aware of these influences.
And then feeling like we're puppets. Okay, so let's talk about how positive feelings can lead to what Kahneman calls cognitive ease. How does that connect to the idea of coherence?
Well, cognitive ease is that feeling of fluency and familiarity when things just seem to make sense.
Right.
And it often comes along with positive emotions.
Like when you're in a good mood.
And that feeling of ease can actually lead us to believe that things are more coherent than they really are.
Oh, interesting.
There was this experiment where they gave people an explanation for their good mood.
Okay.
They said it was because of the music they were listening to.
Oh, I see.
And that actually weakened their intuition that a certain statement was coherent.
So the unexplained good mood made things seem to fit together better.
Yeah, even if there was no real logical connection.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about that story Kahneman tells about meeting the psychologist John multiple times while traveling? What's the takeaway from that?
That story is a great example of the illusion of normalcy.
Okay.
So after they randomly met John once while on vacation, they kind of updated their mental model of John. He became the psychologist we meet when we travel.
Makes sense.
So when they randomly bumped into him again in a totally different place, it didn't feel as surprising as it should have.
Because their brains had already made it normal.
Exactly. System 1 created this new expectation, even though logically it was super unlikely.
Wow. It's like our minds are always trying to create these little stories.
They are, and that ties into this really important concept called WYSIOD.
What you see is all there is.
Yep, it's a mouthful.
Oh.
But basically it means that we tend to make judgments based only on the information that's readily available to us.
Okay.
We don't naturally consider what we might be missing.
Like the missing pieces of the puzzle.
And this can lead to all sorts of biases.
Like overconfidence?
Yes, because we don't account for what we don't know.
And framing effects.
Right, because the way information is presented can totally change our perception.
And base rate neglect.
where we ignore general statistics in favor of vivid, but often irrelevant details.
So we're kind of blind to our own blind spots.
In a way, yeah. It's a fundamental limitation of how our minds work.
Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about some of the things that System 1 is actually really good at.
Yeah, System 1 gets a lot of flack for its biases, but it also has some amazing abilities.
Like what?
Well, it's really good at making these quick assessments of our environment.
Okay.
Like if you look at a bunch of dots, you can instantly tell the average size or density. And this happens super fast and accurately, even if you're not consciously paying attention to it.
Wow.
And System 1 can also count small numbers of objects really quickly.
Without having to, like, count them out one by one.
It just knows.
That's impressive. It's like our brains are doing all this work behind the scenes.
They are. And it's all thanks to System 1.
So as you can see, our minds are a constant flurry of activity, with these two systems working together sometimes against each other to make sense of the world. And we've only just scratched the surface of all the insights in thinking fast and slow.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
But hopefully this has given you a taste of how these concepts play out in your own life.
Absolutely.
And remember, understanding these biases and heuristics isn't about beating yourself up.
Right.
It's about becoming more aware of how your mind works.
So you can make better decisions.
Exactly. And have more interesting conversations with others.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
So here's a question for you to think about. Think back to the last time you felt absolutely certain about something. Could your System 1 have been jumping to conclusions? What easier question might you have answered instead? And how could a little more slow thinking have changed your perspective?
Those are great questions to ponder.
They are. If this deep dive has made you curious, I highly recommend checking out Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. There's so much to learn.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, happy reading.
And keep thinking.